The church bells had fallen silent, their joyful pealing replaced by an uncomfortable hush that seemed to press against the stained glass windows. Martha stood frozen at the altar, her white dress suddenly feeling like a costume for a play she no longer wanted to perform in. The bouquet of wildflowers trembled in her hands as she stared at the empty space where Thomas should have been standing. "He ain't coming, darling," her father whispered gently, his weathered hand finding her shoulder. The congregation behind them shifted restlessly, whispers rippling through the pews like wind through wheat fields. Some faces showed pity, others barely concealed curiosity about the scandal that would fuel conversations for months to come. Martha's chest tightened as the reality settled over her like dust after a summer storm. Thomas Whitmore, the banker's son with his pressed suits and smooth promises, had left her standing there in front of half the town. She could feel the heat of embarrassment crawling up her neck, could hear the subtle murmurs growing louder as people began to realize this wasn't just a delay. She lifted her chin, summoning every ounce of dignity her mother had taught her, and began the long walk back down the aisle. Each step felt like an eternity, the faces blurring through tears she refused to let fall. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, the beginning of everything she dreamed of since she was a little girl playing with cornhusk dolls. As she reached the back of the church, desperate to escape into the harsh sunlight and away from the suffocating sympathy, she nearly collided with a solid chest trapped in a clean but worn shirt. Looking up, she found herself staring into the kindest brown eyes she'd ever seen. "Miss Martha," Jake Sullivan said quietly, removing his hat. His dark hair was still damp from where he'd obviously tried to tame it with water, and she noticed he was wearing what must have been his best clothes, though they were clearly more suited to working cattle than attending weddings. She knew Jake, of course. Everyone in their small Wyoming town knew the quiet cowboy who worked the Morrison Ranch just outside town. He'd been in her schoolhouse years ago, though he'd left early to help support his family after his father died. She'd seen him in town on Saturdays, always polite, always respectful, but keeping mostly to himself. "I'm sorry," she managed, trying to step around him, but he gently caught her elbow. "Martha, wait," he said, and something in his voice made her pause. "I know this ain't the time or place, and I know I got no right to speak up, but I can't let you walk out of here thinking you ain't worth loving." She stared at him, confusion mixing with her humiliation. "What?" Jake glanced toward the church, where people were beginning to file out, their voices growing louder as they discussed the spectacle they'd just witnessed. He guided her away from the crowd, toward the shade of the old oak tree where carriages waited. "I've been watching you for years, Martha," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I've seen how you help Mrs. Peterson with her groceries when her arthritis acts up, how you always have a kind word for the children, how you light up when you talk about the books you're reading. You're the finest woman in this whole territory, and if that fool Whitmore can't see that, then he don't deserve you." Martha felt fresh tears threatening, but these were different from the ones of embarrassment. "Jake, you don't understand. I'm ruined now. No decent man will want me after this. I'll be the woman who was left at the altar, the subject of gossip and pity." Jake stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't care what anyone else thinks or says. I've been too much of a coward to speak up before, thinking you were too good for a simple cowboy like me. But seeing you hurt like this, seeing that man throw away the most precious thing he could ever have, well, it's given me courage I didn't know I had." The wedding guests were beginning to notice their conversation now, and Martha was acutely aware of the attention. But something in Jake's manner, the absolute sincerity in his voice, kept her rooted to the spot. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Jake took her hands in his, careful not to crush the wilted flowers. His hands were rough from years of hard work, scarred from rope burns and honest labor, so different from Thomas's soft, manicured fingers. "I'm saying that if he won't love you, I'll treasure you forever," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I know I don't have much to offer. I don't have a fancy house in town or money in the bank. But I have a heart that's been yours since the day I first heard you laugh, and hands that'll work every day to make you happy if you'll let them." Martha felt the world shift around her, as if she were seeing everything from a completely different angle. She looked at Jake, really looked at him, and saw strength in the line of his shoulders, gentleness in the way he held her hands, and a devotion in his eyes that Thomas had never shown, not even in their most intimate moments. "You're serious," she breathed. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Jake replied. "I know this is sudden, and I know you need time to heal from what happened today. I'm not asking you to marry me right here and now. I'm asking you to let me court you proper, to show you how a woman like you deserves to be treated." Behind them, Martha could hear her father approaching, probably wondering what was keeping her. She could also hear the continued whispers of the congregation, the scandal growing with each passing moment. By tomorrow, the story would be all over town, and by next week, it would have reached the neighboring settlements. But looking into Jake's earnest face, she found she didn't care about the gossip anymore. Thomas's rejection, which had felt like the end of the world just minutes ago, was beginning to feel like something else entirely. Maybe it was freedom. "Jake," she said slowly, "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," he replied. "Say you'll let me prove to you that not all men are like Thomas Whitmore. Say you'll give me a chance to show you what real love looks like." Her father reached them then, his face concerned. "Martha, honey, are you all right?" She looked between the two men, the father who had raised her with steady love and the cowboy who was offering her a different kind of future than she'd ever imagined. The wedding dress that had felt like a prison moments ago now seemed like something she could easily step out of, leaving behind the life that had been planned for her in favor of one she might choose for herself. "Daddy," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, "I'd like you to meet Jake Sullivan. He's just made me a very interesting proposition." Jake straightened under her father's scrutiny, meeting the older man's eyes directly. "Sir, I know this isn't how these things are usually done, but I'd like permission to court your daughter. I promise you I'll treat her with all the respect and care she deserves." Martha's father looked between them, taking in Jake's honest face and Martha's changing expression. Slowly, a smile began to tug at the corners of his mouth. "Well," he said finally, "I reckon this day turned out different than any of us expected. But sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places." He extended his hand to Jake. "I'd be honored to have you call on my daughter, son." As Jake shook her father's hand, Martha felt something she hadn't experienced in months of wedding planning with Thomas, genuine excitement about the future. She looked down at her wedding dress, then back up at Jake's hopeful face. "I think," she said, surprising herself, "I'd like to get out of this dress and into something more suitable for a buggy ride. That is, if you're free this afternoon, Mr. Sullivan." Jake's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Miss Martha, I'm free for as long as you'll have me." And as they walked away from the church together, leaving behind the whispers and the ruins of her planned life, Martha realized that sometimes the greatest treasures came disguised as disasters, and sometimes the love you needed was standing right there waiting, if only you were brave enough to see it.